Oh, Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe Stalin said, these rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the fortunate he has been, and he's made the workers' state the best the world has ever seen.
عاش الجندي يوم ما حطم شوكة الاستعمار، كان عنوان النصر الثوري في كل بلد أحرار، وسمعنا بيقولها قوية باسم مبادئ أبية،
وسمعنا
أفدي بالروح وأعيش في النصر بطل وشجاع. أنا خط هجوم ودفاع، أنا رمز سلام وصراع. أفدي بالروح وأعيش في النصر بطل وشجاع. حيوا معايا قولوا معايا
عاش الجندي العربي عاش.
عاش الزرع يوم الشمس ما حست بيها عليه، فرشت نورها وكبر الزرع وهو مداري عليه. عاش الزرع يوم الشمس ما حست بيها عليه، فرشت نورها وكبر الزرع وهو مداري عليه. وسمعناه بيقولها هوية أرض ولادي ورجعت ليا.
وسمعناه بيقولها هوية أرض ولادي ورجعت ليا.
حرمونا سنين وسنين وافتكروا الناس نايمين، وطلعنا عليهم يوم خلصنا حقهم ملايين. حرمونا سنين وسنين وافتكروا الناس نايمين، وطلعنا عليهم يوم خلصنا حقهم ملايين. حيوا معايا قولوا معايا
عاش فلاح الثورة عاش.
عاش الفن حضارة الأمة يبنيها الفنان، يروى حياتها في غنوة في كلمة في صورة بروح وإيمان. عاش الفن حضارة الأمة يبنيها الفنان، يروى حياتها في غنوة في كلمة في صورة بروح وإيمان. وسمعنا بيقولها قوية مجد بلادي عهد عليا.
وسمعنا بيقولها هوية مجد بلادي عهد عليا.
قلبي وروحي ملك الفني والاتنين لبلادي هدية. حيوا معايا قولوا معايا
عاش الفن رسالة عاش.
عاش العامل يوم ما فكر يبني البلد ودار فيها مداخل طالع منها لهب النور والنار. عاش العامل يوم ما فكر يبني البلد ودار فيها مداخل طالع منها لهب النور والنار. وسمعنا بيقولها قوية ده إنتاجي وصنع ايديا.
وسمعنا بيقولها هوية ده إنتاجي وصنع ايديا.
حققنا بعون الله للشعب دعاه ومنى، والخير زاد منا وفاض والفايد صدرناه. حققنا بعون الله للشعب دعاه ومنى، والخير زاد منا وفاض والفايد صدرناه. قولوا معايا حيوا معايا
عاش عاش العامل عاش.
عاش الطالب يوم ما طلب العلم كتاب وسلاح، عارف العلم وسيلة تحقق غاية كل نجاح. عاش الطالب يوم ما طلب العلم كتاب وسلاح، عارف العلم وسيلة تحقق غاية كل نجاح. وسمعنا بيقولها قوية في الإعداد وفي الكلية.
وسمعنا بيقولها هوية في الإعداد وفي الكلية.
العلم سلاح جبار بيحول ليلنا نهار، يسعى للنور بالنور ويواجه النار بالنار. العلم سلاح جبار بيحول ليلنا نهار، يسعى للنور بالنور ويواجه النار بالنار. حيوا معايا قولوا معايا
عاش الجيل الصاعد عاش.
عاش الشعب العربي كله شعب سلام وأمان، عاش الوعي العربي كله ثورة في كل مكان. عاش الشعب العربي كله شعب سلام وأمان، عاش الوعي العربي كله ثورة في كل مكان. عاش الشعب العربي كله شعب سلام وأمان، عاش الوعي العربي كله ثورة في كل مكان. ثورة مارد للحرية هب ونادى بالقومية،
ثورة مارد للحرية هب ونادى بالقومية.
ردينا عليك يا جمال وايدينا في ايديك يا جمال، وطلعنا معاك يا جمال نبني وياك يا جمال. ردينا عليك
يا جمال
وايدينا في ايديك
يا جمال،
وطلعنا معاك
يا جمال
نبني وياك يا جمال. حيوا معايا قولوا معايا
عاش عبد الناصر عاش.
Утреннего стяг в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весь летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И он продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the latest live stream on this, the evening of the 12th of November 2023. And I hope you enjoyed the musical introduction there. Sorry to cut it short, but there are things that need to be gotten on with. And, of course, the musical introduction is always subject to change, and further recommendations are always gratefully received. We start off, as is customary, by going through the those who are present in the chat, and I'm going to just go through those immediately. So, hello to Jay, who says, comradely greetings from NATO's home in North America, where the mood is as dark as the skies. A portentous opening for a portentous evening. Peter, good evening to you, my fellow resident of Perfidious Albion. James Graham, hello to you. Hello to President Jesus and DE. And Lavitz, who says, greetings all from San Francisco, which currently has the dishonor of hosting Joe Biden this week for the APEC conference. Hard. I do agree. Good evening, or good morning, in fact, to Ash, who's joining us from Kuala Lumpur Airport on the way back to India. Well, glad you could join us for the stream in transit. Martin, good evening, and good evening to Steph Lopez and Ian Foster and AB, who is coming to us live from London. Well, live from the center of the decaying empire, and I am, of course, in a region of the decaying empire. Right, so we'll be getting to the main body of the discussion in just a moment, which is I wanted to start doing some explorations of various different economies, in particularly the, British people and Americans call it the Middle East. Perhaps the more accurate name these days would be West Asia. Because I think that by examining that, you can explain a lot of the conduct and the contradictory or apparently contradictory behavior between the words and the deeds of leaders like the King of Jordan, like the rulers of, Morocco, for instance, and, of course, the words and the actions of Mr. Erdogan. And so we're going to be looking at that in just a moment. And the first, though, I wanted to check in on latest from the battlefields of West Asia, shall we say. Multiple and contradictory things happening, but the confirmed report from the northern border of occupied Palestine is that at least 20 Israeli military personnel have been killed in battles with Hezbollah today, which is a big number. And the Israeli cabinet has apparently, according to the Israeli media, gone into a gigantic row with the military and the bulk of the cabinet now in favor of some kind of military campaign against Hezbollah after this. Netanyahu, again, this is Israeli media reports we're taking this from, is opposed to it, believing, it would seem quite sensibly, that this is basically a road to ruin for him. And the rest of the cabinet appear not to care anymore. Ben-Gvir, the lunatic Kahanist, self-described fascist, who is running around with his own militia now, and is basically the most extreme end of the settler, the West Bank settlers' political representation. He's now demanding that Netanyahu resign. Now, if this all comes to pass, unless, of course, the Americans can essentially pressure them to keep themselves from devouring each other for at least another few weeks, if Netanyahu goes, if, so we say, Ben-Gvir and others pull their support from this war cabinet and vote against it and basically say that they're not prepared to serve with Netanyahu anymore, then, well, not only is that the end of Netanyahu, which is cause enough to celebrate, but they will, of course, replace him with somebody just as bad, if not even worse. But it's worth noting, and here I'll reference an interesting interview that was given to Sina Rahmani, whose show I've been on in the past. His podcast, named The East as a podcast, had an interesting guest on in the form of a Lebanese journalist recently, who made the observation that Netanyahu, he likes to talk this big game, and this has been his trick throughout his political career. he'll talk this big game and to indulge the ultra reactionaries and get into alliances with them. But when it comes to taking big risks, he's prepared to let other people take the risks. So Trump, for instance, in his usual off-the-cuff style, revealed that when Trump went all in for assassinating Qasem Soleimani, Netanyahu actually backed out of the plan and didn't want anything to do with it because he was afraid of the reprisals. And with this campaign, Netanyahu's been, of course, killing a lot of Palestinians, talking a big game, throwing out Bible quotes, talking about we'll wipe them out like Amalek and stuff like that, which is just like very cynical pieces of manipulation. I'm damn certain that Netanyahu doesn't believe in anything like that. But he also has been, apparently, again, according to Israeli media reports, consistently resisting the idea of spreading out the war. And that's because he does understand quite well that Israel would not do very well in a war against Hezbollah now. Now, according to estimates of the war that was fought in 2006 between Israel and Hezbollah, Hezbollah, in terms of actual fighters, didn't use any more than between 1,000 and 2,000 men who were deployed on the Lebanese occupied Palestine border. Now they apparently have up to at least 100,000 who they could call on. It isn't just Hezbollah fighters anymore. There's after 2006, they formed a much wider organization that drew from not just the Shia Muslim areas of Lebanon, but also from recruiting from Sunni Muslims and Christians to bring all these free, often fractured sections of the Lebanese population together into a unified national resistance force. And apparently there's been an awful lot of mobilization, even amongst areas of the population that had previously been hostile to Hezbollah, into this wider organization since the beginning of the current Palestinian military operation on October 7th. So Hezbollah has gone in 40 years from being a organization which is principally focused on and dominated by the Lebanese Shia Muslims to being the center of a much wider organization, which can, I think, quite genuinely be said to be an army of national liberation, a movement of national liberation. And of course, that is reflected in some of the messaging that Nasrallah and the other Hezbollah leaders engage in. And so what Netanyahu, I think, probably does fear, with good reason, is that if they get involved in a war with Hezbollah, they're biting off far more than they could possibly chew. They ballsed up and lost in the war in 2006. They were outfought on the ground by Hezbollah. And Hezbollah now has far more experienced men in its ranks than the Israeli army does. They have a core of apparently between 10 to 15,000 veterans who have been involved in the war in Syria, who've had experience fighting in multiple different weather conditions, who have fought various different armed formations, including ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and various other different groups that the West and the Turks were funding and arming. So you have a very battle-hardened core of a much larger national liberation army that is very well equipped, that is very well led, that is incredibly well politically motivated by not just a desire to honor religious devotion, though that is part of it, but by a sense of fighting for Lebanese national liberation. And when you put all that together, when you're facing an Israeli army that is still only used to brutalizing civilians and not doing a particularly effective job at that even, you are not going up in an even fight. Now, on the ground, that is, they would almost certainly lose a battle on the ground with Hezbollah, which means they would try and make up for their deficiencies on the ground by dominating the air, by running a massive aerial bombardment. Now, they tried all this in 2006 and it didn't work. They've been threatening recently, and Nasrallah made reference to this in his recent speech, to level Lebanese cities again, to level Beirut, to level Tyre, Tripoli, to try and bomb Lebanon to the point where they either reignited a Lebanese civil war or they were able to split the population away from Hezbollah. That's clearly what they want to do. They know that they don't stand a very good chance of fighting Hezbollah man to man, so lean on their advantages, which is all about air power. Now, of course, we have seen Hezbollah release videos showing that they not only have a more significant coverage in terms of anti-aircraft weapons now, they'll have gotten some of those presumably from Iran, some from private dealers, and maybe some of them come from Ukraine. So that Hezbollah will have much more capability in terms of being able to target and damage and shoot down Israeli aircraft than the Palestinian forces in Gaza do right now, who have almost none. So if it comes to the crunch and they start shooting down Israeli planes, well, that's another huge problem, because if they can't have complete aerial domination anymore, then they're running out of options, which is probably one of the reasons why the US has stuck those aircraft carriers there, why the British have moved their pedal-powered aircraft carrier down there, I think, to try and back up the Israeli air power in the event of some kind of war with Hezbollah. And I think Nasrallah was right to identify this evolving situation as part of a region-wide national liberation struggle against US imperialism, which is what it is. So we go towards potential escalation. Whether the US imperialists decide that they don't want that right now and they lean on the Israeli cabinet and military and say, no, not at the moment, or whether it is even possible for them to do that now. Let me clarify that. It is always possible for the US imperialists to stop this anytime they want, of course, by simply saying, you're done, no more money, no more weapons. As I've explained previously, though, that would involve them essentially abandoning their military base in the middle, their biggest military base in the Middle East, their big colonial project, the last real settler colonial project that the collective US bloc has actually still in functioning. They've lost all the others, and they don't want to give up this strategic foothold that they have. However, they're facing a situation where they're getting involved in a much bigger regional war that they may not win, and that they have no real means to actually do the fighting other than using air power, and that they could end up with their military presence in Iraq and Syria being wiped out inside a couple of days. So imperialism itself is venturing into very treacherous water, and it's no wonder even Netanyahu is feeling the heat of this. So the contradictions continue to explode, and if you look at the situation, you can see that what's blowing up now in West Asia and the situations that are being aggravated, the contradictions which are breaking out into the open, which are fracturing, you can see the cumulative effects of decades and decades of imperialist predation over the area. And we're going to come to this later when we're talking about the Lebanese economy, because to say it began on October the 7th is only a partial story at best. To say it began in 2006 with the election of Hamas to be the leading faction in the Palestinian Authority, and with the attempted coup against them, that's it's still only the partial story. The reality is that this all began over a century ago with the British manipulation games at the tail end of the Ottoman Empire. Perhaps you could argue it even began before that, but that's certainly the point it begins. And you see the sweep of history moving across the last century, and how the unresolved issues there keep coming back time and time and time again. And the unresolved issue, the central unresolved issue, is the fact that the national liberation process for many of these countries has never been completed. There was nominal independence for a place like Lebanon or Jordan, and that has never been fully pushed to its conclusion to be truly independent sovereign nations. There was, of course, a great leap forward in terms of Egyptian national independence and sovereignty with the Nasserist project, but that ultimately imploded and fell in on itself, and traitors were able to, like Sadat, were able to steer it in the direction of, well, back to being a comprador regime in the service of US imperialism again. So again, to refer to Nasrallah's speech when he says this is about a struggle for national liberation with Palestine at the center of it, but this is region-wide. You know, the Ba'athist government in Iraq made certain strides towards independence, but those were thrown back by the US imperialists. Iran, the reason why it has been targeted over and over again is nothing to do with the Islamic nature of its system or how women are treated in that system or not treated. That's nothing to do with why the US imperialists have consistently taken a hostile position towards it. It has everything to do with the fact that the Iranian Revolution of 1979 to 80 actually did succeed in creating a more genuinely independent and sovereign country, in actually completing the work that somebody like Mossadegh began years earlier, albeit with a different political movement leading it. It did lead towards national independence and, of course, a regional role for Iran in supporting the Lebanese national liberation movement and in supporting Palestinian national liberation movements. And in that sense, of course, Iran plays a progressive role here. So all of these contradictions, all of these ongoing issues that have never been resolved are now coming fully into the open again. And we can only hope that the national liberation forces in Palestine and in Lebanon and in Syria and in Iraq are successful in their struggle to not only defeat the US colonial state in the form of Israel, but also to push out the US occupiers from Syria and Iraq and to remove their influence from the region ultimately, though that will take a much longer struggle, as Nasrallah and others are, of course, aware of. So that's where things stand at the moment. I'm sure there will be more developments tomorrow. I will now just greet a few more people who've come into the chat. So we've got Matthew from Massachusetts, my comrade Ben Kavana, Zuleika, good evening to you, Mutanda, Muzzle Paint, who says solidarity comrades, and Burke, good evening to you. So to go to the main issue that I wanted to just go over tonight, and that's the how to assess a lot of these countries, and in the region, some of whom were at the Organization of Islamic Countries conference the other day. So we're going to go over some of these countries and look at, what their economic composition is, or some details from that can give us an indication as to why these are run by comprador regimes. Now, I'm going to start with Morocco, which is a country I've actually visited. Incredibly beautiful mountain range there, the Atlas Mountains. I recommend it to anybody. Morocco, former French and partially Spanish colony, and has been ruled by a comprador king since independence in the late 1950s. Now, if you're trying to judge what makes the policy of any particular state, it's important to look at, first of all, foreign direct investment inflow into the country. And in the case of Morocco, you have to you can see you can judge as to how the government behaves and judge this according to, of course, the FDI inflow. And the inflow overwhelmingly comes from France, United Arab Emirates, Britain, the Netherlands, and the USA. So the old colonial master in the form of the French, the British, everybody knows about them, perfidious Albion itself, and the Netherlands and the USA are, of course, all members of the US-led imperialist bloc system. So it's no surprise that the comprador king is in bed with them. The UAE, of course, is also integral to this system, and they're going to pop up over and over again as we go through this. UAE, of course, move a lot of capital around, made a lot of money in the oil business. They are, of course, our rulers who were put in place by the British over 50 years ago now, when the British relinquished direct control but kept indirect control via these comprador rulers. The UAE, of course, is also very well integrated into the systems of the British ruling class. British secret police operatives ran their internal repression apparatus for many, many years. I'm not sure if they still do, but they did up to 2011. And they own an awful lot of property in London. They own an awful lot of land in Britain. And they, of course, run several stables full of racehorses as well. So the UAE is also very well integrated into the US imperialist system, principally through its relationship with the British. And, of course, they own Manchester City, one of the scummiest football clubs in Britain. And that's quite some competition that they're in with regard to that title. So foreign direct investment principally in Morocco goes into agriculture, financial services, mining, quarrying, insurance, IT, and the wholesale and retail trade. So with regard to agriculture, they do export a good deal of agricultural products, principally to Spain and France. And they're the two big export locations for Moroccan trade. And so, again, like Spain, completely integrated into the US imperialist system. And so you get the two big export markets in Europe being Spain and France, with Italy quite a bit behind. But also they got significant export trade with India and Brazil, but nowhere near as profitable as the export trade to the old colonial masters. And also, the other big thing in Morocco in recent years has been the expansion of the car industry. Now, Renault, the French giant, has had a production facility in Morocco since 1959. Recently, they've expanded it with going into partnership with the Japanese car makers. You've also got South Korean car makers there. And so you get a big car production element there. And you've also had the Moroccan comprador regime put in place a number of special economic zones for car production companies that are free from a lot of tax and regulatory burdens, as a businessman would say. And they've been encouraging offshoring of production from particularly European, but also Southeast Asian car makers. So you look at who are the big players in the Moroccan economy, and you can see it's all of the Western European elements of the US imperialist bloc, Britain, the Netherlands, France, Spain, and you've got the USA itself and the UAE. So when you look at that, and you look at the political regime that was put in place there by the French that has ruled uninterruptedly ever since, you can see why this is a country which, of course, was happy to take Trump's offer of normalizing fully with Israel, because, well, they'd probably done it under the table ever since they achieved independence anyway. So this is a fairly easy to explain comprador regime. It's always been like this. Its economy is heavily dependent on both trade with imperialist countries and investment inside it from some of those same imperialist countries. It's completely controlled by the imperialist system. It does have an increasing amount of trade with the Chinese, but as always, to quote Stalin, consciousness lags behind material reality. So they have been in the pocket of imperialism for over 60 years. So increasing trade with China isn't going to threaten that anytime soon. So you look at a country like Morocco, it's fairly easy to explain where it stands and how it lands on these international issues. And it's no surprise that it was one of those that voted against the Islamic Nations Conference the other day, any measures regarding cutting off Israel from the oil trade. I mean, this is a country which is essentially just run by US imperialism, or the US imperialist bloc. It has a king, it has a government, but these answer to Washington and London and Paris and Madrid. So it's a fairly easy one to explain that. Now, the second one I wanted to talk about is a little bit more complicated, but it was also fairly straightforward in its own way. So that's the Jordanian economy. Now, Jordan, of course, was started as a comprador state, or a comprador ruler was put in place by the British, the Hashemite ruling dynasty there. And it's always been very close to British imperialism. Its royal family send its sons to Sandhurst, which is the British military officer training school. You get a lot of these comprador types going over there to send their sons for, I believe it's like a 15-week training course. It's essentially ceremonial. Like, they learn how to march up and down, wear a uniform, salute, hold a sword, raise and lower a flag, that kind of thing. Shoot a ceremonial pistol at a peasant, that kind of shit. And they're very well integrated into the British ruling class system. So that's the first thing to say. The political regime there was completely designed from top to bottom by British imperialism, and it's a regime that's stayed in place ever since then. And it's, in many respects, a country that's worse off than Morocco, because it has very few natural resources. It's a country which is, of course, it could be developed further, but capitalism, particularly the form of capitalism that is run in Jordan, and the imperialist system which dominates the Jordanian political regime, has no interest in the capital-intensive projects that it would take to actually carry out more economic development in Jordan. So the biggest single investor, according to the research I've done, is, again, this is the UAE pop-up, who are, of course, as I've said, very well integrated into the US imperialist system. So they're the biggest single investor in Jordan, to the tune of $4 billion. And now, following on from the UAE, you have British imperialism as the next biggest investor, and Kuwait. Now, Kuwait, bit of an interesting one, very much a creation of British imperialism, has a democratically elected parliament on bourgeois lines now, so it does make some occasional statements against Israel, but still very much in the camp of US British imperialism. So the biggest investors there, UAE, British imperialism, and Kuwait, basically all part of the US imperialist nexus. And so it's no wonder then that the Jordanian state remains firmly in the camp of imperialism. That, and of course, the security and military apparatus is all dominated by men who've been trained by British and US imperialism. So again, the fact that they are saying anything at all about the Palestinian situation, the fact that the king says there has to be a ceasefire, we need a two-state solution, the fact that they say anything at all is only as a result of the pressure they're feeling from the Jordanian masses. Were they left to their own devices, they'd sell out in a second. They wouldn't even mention it. So the other thing you turn up once you start looking into this is that the Jordanian government actually did want to do more joint projects with the Israelis, but the Israeli state proved so difficult to deal with that even the Jordanian compradors couldn't deal with them. Found that quite interesting. So the other thing to look at is the fact that the economy in Jordan, according to the statistics from World Bank, is dominated by the service sector. There is an industrial sector. It's bigger than the Lebanese industrial sector, certainly, but it's not particularly large. The investment from the FDI mainly goes into real estate, financial services, and tourism. So you've got an economy which is dominated by the service sector, and you also have the other crucial thing to look at is the external debt. Jordanian external debt is $39 billion, which of course is owed mainly to countries and institutions which are in the imperialist system. So again, that is another means by which imperialism keeps a tight hold over these countries. And as we've covered before, imperialism is very keen for countries to take out more and more loans from, say, the IMF, because the more debt you can pile on them, the more you can guarantee or have a better guarantee of their good behavior in the future. So, to use the example that I've gone to before, the reason why Moreno, when he was president of Ecuador, took out another 4 billion loan from the IMF was precisely A, because US imperialism told him to. And US imperialism told him to do that because they wanted to be sure that whoever followed after him would be crippled by even further debt. So it's never about development, for all the crap that gets talked by IMF and World Bank officials and the US imperialists about, oh, well, we gave them this loan for development. No, bullshit. They gave them that loan to make sure that more debt was incurred. And often, in the case of like nations like Greece, it's a loan that's only for the purposes of paying back another loan. So, I mean, loan sharks are less ruthless than the imperialists when it comes to the strategic deployment of debt. So again, with Jordan, fairly easy to understand its place once you find out who the investors are, what they're investing in. You look at the political structures, military structures that were put in place by British imperialism and which remain there to this day. It's fairly easy to understand the political line of the regime there and the comprador king. And you must understand then that the only way that he moves at all is if he is under incredible pressure from the roots, from the masses in Jordanian society. Now, a more complicated one, and one with a much more powerful economy, is, of course, our old friend, Mr. Erdogan, and Turkey. Now, a lot of people, including the economists, were getting very excited to varying different degrees. So the multipolarists and the economists and the bits of the British ruling class, the more idiotic bits of it, were getting very excited about, or very agitated about, whether Mr. Erdogan was going to break away from NATO or stop dealing with the EU or do more sanctions busting to aid Russia, all of those things. And what his actions are going to be like when it comes to the question of Palestine. But you dive in to the actual reality of the Turkish economy and Turkish trade and investment, you can see that Erdogan's not going anywhere in terms of his change of alliances. And you can see that unless, of course, the Turkish masses bring pressure to bear upon him, which goes up to the point of endangering his regime, all he's going to do is make noise. So you look at the actual trading partners of the Turkish state. Number one is, of course, Germany. And that accounts for 8.3% of all Turkish exports go to Germany. After Germany is, of course, next trading partner is US imperialism itself, followed by Iraq, of course, a neighboring country, but followed by British imperialism after that, followed by Italy, followed by Spain, then France. Russia comes in at number 8, so that's why Erdogan periodically tilts towards Russia. It's an important market, and it's a growing market, it has to be said, with regards to the future relations there. And the Netherlands follows that, and then, of course, number 10, with 7.303 billion worth of trade, is, of course, Israel itself. So with regard to that, you can see that other than Russia and possibly Iraq, so 8 out of the 10 are countries that are either US imperialism itself or the US imperialist bloc. China isn't even in the top 10. So again, other than Russia, there's nobody in there which is either not a imperialist state itself, or in the case of Iraq, one which is still heavily influenced by imperialism. So again, that's why I say for the immediate period, barring drastic changes with regard to with regard to the nature of the political situation in Turkey, Erdogan's not changing course. That's where follow the capital flows, follow the trading relationships. Furthermore, the Turkish external debt is $275.8 billion. Now, that's more manageable for a much more industrialized country like Turkey, but still significant amount of debt. Also, 60% of all foreign direct investment into Turkey comes from Europe. So, again, even with all the fallouts and the spats and the sparring and the shouting and the screaming that you get between the EU leaders and Erdogan, he still gives them what they want in the end. Because, again, like, he doesn't want to endanger the very good business that the Turkish capitalist class is doing with the EU leaders. Now, one thing that surprised me was the fact that you find that British imperialism is the leading investor in Turkey. And British imperialism is the leading provider of FDI in there, followed by the US imperialists themselves, the Netherlands, Switzerland, again, our old friends in the UAE, Germany, Luxembourg, South Korea, Japan, and Ireland, strangely enough. Now, the Irish section there, I think, is more to do with money that comes through Ireland. Bear in mind, the Irish ruling class's business model is not only to operate basically a real estate scam on their whole country, but to operate as essentially a sorting house for capital that's going elsewhere. So you get a lot of corporate headquarters there. You get money that's moved through Ireland and elsewhere. So a lot of that might not be Irish capital, but it's capital that comes from companies which are registered in Ireland. But again, all of those FDI providers, British imperialism, US imperialism, the Netherlands, Switzerland, the UAE, Germany, Luxembourg, all part of the US imperialist bloc, and then South Korea, Japan, and Ireland. Again, now South Korea and Japan occupied and largely controlled by US imperialism, Ireland controlled by a combination of US imperialism and British imperialism. So these are the big investors in Turkey. That's the big trading partners are all in Europe or the United States, or there's some in the region as well. So that's why Erdogan makes a lot of noise and doesn't do anything. That's why he makes a lot of noise, because he has to. The pressure is on him to do something. The whole point, though, is that he's not going to put at risk all of that trade, all of that foreign direct investment, all of those economic partnerships that he's built up over many years and which predate him. He's not going to blow that up by going into a war against US imperialism, which is what a war against Israel would actually mean. You go to war with Israel, you are going to war with US imperialism. So why on earth would he do that? Being a loyal representative of Turkish capitalism, it doesn't make any sense. The only way you could believe that is if you looked at what he said and took it as the gospel truth, as how he was going to act. But then you look at his track record and he's a solid ally of imperialism. He's got a joint project running with Israel in Azerbaijan right now, which of course the Israelis have their own interests in pursuing. So again, like the question is, well, what is the actual reality of the trading patterns here? Then of course you get the fact that Turkey is well integrated into the NATO system and has been for many, many decades and shows no signs of leaving. So again, like, it's important to look at the splits that do exist in the imperialist bloc, because there are some. And it's true that Turkish trade relations with China have improved following Erdogan's failed attempt to stir up pan-Turkic Islamism in Xinjiang, which was an insane plan, which thankfully the Chinese defeated. So there has been an increase in trade there. But China hasn't even cracked the top 10 on trading partners yet, not cracked into the bigger providers of FDI. So there's not, barring a drastic change inside the political situation there, in the way that the masses are pressuring Erdogan, barring that, this isn't going to change. And so it's important to actually go through this and see where the interests of the different ruling classes actually lie. Because otherwise you're going to start, if you just base this on memes and feelings, which is what a lot of people do, and what the Erdogan's statements about, well, if you want another crusade, we'll give you another crusade. Yeah. Everybody in Europe at this stage, all of the European countries are well used to Erdogan's style, which is make a lot of noise until you get something that you want, which is usually more money, then shut up and start doing business again. And then go back to making a lot of noise, implying you're going to go into BRICS, implying you're going to go and join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all of which is possible in the future. But right now, this isn't going to change very much if things stay as they are. Right, where are we? We've got some people coming in. So, Georgi asks, NATO chief said that F-15 Eagle aircrafts are ready to depart to Ukraine. Now they are housed at the training base in Romania. What do you think about this? And where do you think these planes will take off and land to carry out missions on the Ukrainian-Russian front? Is it F-15s or F-16s? I mean, I'm to be honest, I'm not well up on the technical difference. The plan I saw with regard to that was that they were training Ukrainian pilots on how to use either F-15s or F-16s, and they were it was going to be another few months before they were ready to go, unless of course they've just done what they've done with the various different mercenaries who've gone into Ukraine and basically just declared that a bunch of pilots who can fly these things are no longer serving in the US Air Force or whatever, or the Romanian Air Force. Now, if they're going to use them in Ukraine, well, they won't. They're not stupid enough to fly them directly from Romania. As I've said before, they have always been afraid of Russian retaliation, which is why, just for all the stupid things that they've done, they haven't risked directly assaulting Russian forces with aircraft or forces that come directly from a NATO country. So they will, if they do use them, fly them into an airfield in Ukraine which has a solid set of air defenses around it, and then they'll try and use them on Russian air power, or to the thing they may have in mind is to use some kind of air to ground missile, perhaps against some propaganda target, which is all they've done with the Storm Shadows and things like that. They've used them a bit on Russian forces, but they keep trying to blow up the Kerch Bridge, which is this mad idea the British had. It was going to be some kind of big propaganda triumph for them, and they keep failing. So that they might try and use it on that. But given that the Russians have improved their air defenses to the point where they've now got stuff that can blow Ukrainian jets out of the sky, and the Ukrainian jets don't even detect it coming, well, then what kind of good is that going to do? But I mean, if the F-15 is an old plane, to go off James Graham's comment that it's an F-rust bucket, then what exactly is launching a few of them from a Ukrainian airfield up against a very sophisticated Russian air defense system and Russian Air Force? What's that going to do? I mean, I genuinely don't understand what the hell they're thinking they're going to get, other than getting some pictures on Ukrainian television of American-provided jets taking off from a Ukrainian airfield, and Zelensky can say, look, I'm still winning. We've got American jets. Again, it seems that they are, again, manufacturing a reality here, or attempting to manufacture a reality. I mean, to be honest, and this is where I do find that certain French theorists are useful. If you read someone like Baudrillard, you can start to understand the way the Ukrainians are fighting this war a lot better. Or more to the point, not the Ukrainians, the way that the NATO planners are fighting the war. It's a war that is happening, but the way that they've portrayed it inside Ukraine and inside the West is so far removed from the reality of it that you might as well be reading from Baudrillard's book, Gulf War Never Happened. The Ukraine war that they are selling hasn't happened. the brutal reality of it, of course, never ever makes British or French or German television. Very rarely, even to this day. They're admitting that things might be going wrong now. They're saying, oh, well, it might be a stalemate. But looking at it now, the Russians still haven't deployed all their forces. They're slowly strangling the Ukrainians around Avdiivka. They're making some moves elsewhere. According to Russian military analysts like Boris Rosen, who runs the Colonel Kassad channel on Telegram, and the Slavyangrad channel, which is in English, the Russians are preparing for, if not major assaults, and certainly decisive moves as we go into winter. Speculation was this time last year that they were going to do that. Now they're in a much better position to do that. Now they've drained the Ukrainians of everything they've got, and the imperialists are distracted elsewhere. So more to come on that, I suspect. But I can't see what a bunch of F-15s are going to do for them other than get shot down really quickly. Eduardo asks whether I was referring to Correa. No, I believe I said Moreno. I wasn't. Correa didn't take an IMF loan. In fact, Correa, if I'm remembering this rightly, was very careful not to incur more debt and was trying to get out of it. Moreno, the traitor, took that loan out specifically to indebt and cripple Ecuador. So Moreno, there's not enough bad things that can be said about the guy. Karen Mendes says that the Ukrainian pilots have to learn English first. Very true. And that the Ukrainians are also recruiting pregnant women, which is really a bottom-of-the-barrel maneuver. I mean, I'm not even sure the latter period Nazis did that. Martin says, according to Newsweek, Ukraine has beaten the Russian Federation several times over now. Yes, very true. Richard asks, do you think that Palestinian communists can organize and somewhat make a difference in the current conflict? Well, I would argue that they are. Remember, the PFLP, a Marxist-Leninist organization with long-time roots in the Palestinian communities, both in Gaza and on the West Bank, are part of the National Liberation Forces, and as are the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. So that's two Marxist-Leninist groups that are a core part of the National Liberation Forces fighting in Gaza right now. So they already are making a difference. And there's far more of them than you would be led to believe, both in Gaza and on the West Bank. And in the Gaza case, they are collaborating every day with the fighters from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So I would argue they already are and have been making a considerable difference. Georgi confirms it's about F-16s. Well, the comment still stands. I don't see what a bunch of 40-year-old planes flying against Russian air defenses that were able to shoot these things down 40 years ago when it was the Soviet Union. I don't see what these are going to do, other than to put the pictures on Ukrainian television and to have them look as if they're, being some great breakthrough. That's why I suspect what they're going to do is like a propaganda attack on the Kerch Bridge or something. But they'll just end up with all these things shot down and all the pilots either ejected or captured or killed. So again, like this, the Ukrainian war tactic designed by NATO is just to keep things going for another week. And so that's all that this will do. They will enable Zelensky to go on TV and say, look, great Ukrainian Air Force flying American jets. That's American jets, everybody. We've got American jets. Isn't everything going great? And then it'll all go quiet when the Russians shoot them all down. Right, I'll move on to talk about, we've talked about the comprador nature of the Ukrainian ruling class before, so I think I'll come back to that on another night. But I wanted to get to mention Lebanon, though the more I researched into Lebanon, the more interesting and horrifying the story became. Because it's clear that, first of all, Lebanese ruling class, for the most part, complete compradors, completely useless. Not only did they easily get a section of them at least side with the Israelis and US imperialism in the 70s and 80s and tried to destroy the country in order that they could rule over it as a US vassal. That's the phalangists and people like that. But also, like, they essentially ran a regime in the 90s that, after the Civil War ended, that clocked up a gigantic amount of debt that it now stands at, let me just find this, they got $34.5 billion dollars worth of external debt. And of course, this is weighed against a tiny economy. And the other thing that's happened is that since 2019, there's been a debt crisis and a liquidity crisis in the Lebanese economy that has almost wiped out completely Lebanese industry. So if you look at the amount of the breakdown of the Lebanese economy by sector since 2010, you can see that, yeah, it was dominated by services and agriculture, but there was a consistent sector that reached about 16.3% of GDP in 2013 that was based around industry. That's all gone now. It's now collapsed to 2.7% of GDP is generated from industrial production. So the whole economy is dominated by services. So the debt crisis and liquidity crisis that broke in 2019 destabilized things to where a lot of industries got shut down. And before that, the country had been destabilized further by the war in Syria and over 1 million Syrian refugees coming into the country. Which makes me, by the way, I'm just going to digress for a second. When I see these fucking idiots in the press in this country moaning about Syrian refugees, it's like for the same people who encouraged the war on Syria, moaning about a few thousand Syrian refugees coming here, when like Lebanon's absorbed over 1.5 million Syrians, and that has far worse effects on Lebanon than a few thousand do here. I mean, it's just a fucking joke. People in the bourgeois racists in this country are just such pathetic creatures. But the large influx there into Lebanon did destabilize things to a degree, as did the consistent maneuvers of U.S. imperialism to try and damage Hezbollah. To come back to where we started from here, a lot of the hostile activity carried out by U.S. imperialism and the Saudis over the years. The Saudis have played a big role in Lebanese politics. They run basically the Hariri family, Saad Hariri and his father, Rafik Hariri, whose assassination kicked off a color revolution basically that was directed against Syria in the mid-2000s, run by the Bush administration. And it forced the evacuation of Syrian troops from Lebanon. And some Syrian commentators, such as Kavak al-Massian, have argued that the withdrawal of Syrian troops from Lebanon helped pave the road for the assault on Syria itself, which is, I would argue, that's quite a valid argument. But the destabilization campaigns against Lebanon have been consistent, and they revolve around trying to uproot Hezbollah from Lebanon, because it's not just that Hezbollah is directed successful operations against both Israel and, of course, U.S. imperialism itself, but U.S. imperialism rightly fears it as an adversary because it's proven to be very successful in combating their attempts to control Lebanon. And so they've done all kinds of things to try and essentially weaken Hezbollah, and it's not worked. I'm more and more convinced that the explosion at the port of Beirut, by the way, the port of Beirut used to generate a lot of revenue for the Lebanese economy, and that was severely damaged by the blast that took place there in 2019. I'm more and more convinced that this was foul play of some description or another. I don't know enough about it to say exactly what it was yet, but given the sabotage campaigns and the ruthlessness with which US imperialism pursues its objectives elsewhere in the world, their involvement in a destabilization operation like that can't be ruled out. So you've got a country which has also 29.6% unemployment, a large amount of poverty, an energy crisis, a liquidity crisis, a debt crisis, a collapsing industrial sector. And now, of course, it's facing the possibility of an all-out attack from the US imperialists again via their Israeli proxy. So with that in mind, it's no surprise that more and more have actually flocked to join the National Liberation Forces headed by Hezbollah, because all of this comes down to the fact that Lebanon, even after the French cleared out of there after World War II, has never been a truly independent country. And Hezbollah is the most effective national liberation force out there at the moment, which is why more and more Lebanese have been joining up to it. And to remove the influence of US imperialism and, of course, its Saudi proxy, even though the Saudis have been getting a bit wayward recently, and the influence of the Israeli colonial regime, and to, of course, develop the economy requires the establishment of full national independence, which can only come with the defeat of those reactionary imperialist forces dominating Lebanon or attempting to dominate Lebanon. So when Hassan Nasrallah says that it's a struggle for Lebanese national independence, he is right, because what's happened since the end of the Lebanese civil war is that it's an economy which is dominated by a comprador bourgeois who are in the pocket of US imperialism for the most part, and who would happily sell the country to US imperialism via the Saudis and the Israelis in a heartbeat. So the National Liberation War that was started by Hezbollah 40 years ago still goes on, and if you look at the state of the Lebanese economy, you can see just how much of a struggle that this is going to be. But that's why Nasrallah said they're in a very long war here. So I will go deeper into the Lebanese crisis of 2019 and Lebanese economy in a future program. But that's the overview I'm going to give for now of some of these countries. If there's demands to go further into this, I will do. Now, coming up on Tuesday, I'm going to be doing the program on what constitutes imperialism in terms of what my references to it as decaying monopoly capital, the crisis of the rate of profit, etc. So be sure to tune in for that one. And we've also got coming up soon on Patreon the upcoming review of the 2005 Indian film Mangal Pandey, The Rising, and also going to be doing another episode on Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth quite soon. So I will draw this to a close for this evening. Thank you to everybody who's contributed to the discussion tonight. It always makes it much more interesting the more contributions that we get. And I will be back with you again tomorrow.
Oh, Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kick them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe Stalin said, these rivers, they're ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the fortune he has seen, and he's made the worker state the best the world has ever seen.
عاش الجيل الصاعد جيل من شعب مجاهد عاش يبني ويجاهد عاش بكفاحه الخالد عاش يبني ويجاهد عاش بكفاحه الخالد راجل واحد مبدأ واحد
عاش جيل ثورتنا
عاش الجندي يوم ما حطم شوكة الاستعمار كان عنوان النصر الثوري في كل بلد أحرار عاش الجندي يوم ما حطم شوكة الاستعمار كان عنوان النصر الثوري في كل بلد أحرار وسمعنا بيقولها قوية باسم مبادئ أبية
وسمعنا بيقولها قوية باسم مبادئ أبية
أنا خط هجوم ودفاع أنا رمز سلام وصراع أفدي بالروح وأعيش في النصر بطل وشجاع أنا خط هجوم ودفاع أنا رمز سلام وصراع أفدي بالروح وأعيش في النصر بطل وشجاع حيوا معايا قولوا معايا
عاش الجندي العربي عاش
عاش الزرع يوم الشمس ما حست بيها عليه فرشت نوره وكبر الزرع وهو مداري عليه عاش الزرع يوم الشمس ما حست بيها عليه فرشت نوره وكبر الزرع وهو مداري عليه وسمعنا